Maya stood in the long line at the airport gate, shifting her backpack from one shoulder to the other. She was tired from the long day, but she was also excited. She and her mother were flying home after spending a week visiting relatives. It wasn't her first time on a plane, but she still felt a little rush of energy every time she traveled. Maybe it was the noise of the airport, or the smell of fresh coffee from the nearby kiosk, or just the feeling of going somewhere new, even if that new place was simply her own house again. Beside her, her mother checked her boarding pass for the 10th time. She always did that. Even though Maya knew she had already memorized every detail on that small piece of paper. "We're in different seats," her mother said again. Frowning slightly, "I know," Maya replied softly. "It's okay. Maybe I can ask someone to switch." Her mother nodded, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. She wasn't worried about the seating itself. She was worried because Maya didn't like sitting next to strangers for long periods. It made her nervous. Not because she was shy, but because she always felt unsure about starting conversations or responding to them. Being stuck beside someone for hours was a challenge. The line moved slowly. Maya watched people ahead of them, families with little kids holding plush toys, business travelers staring at their phones, couples squeezing hands. Everyone looked tired in one way or another, but there was also that familiar airport-like patience in the air. People just wanted to get to their seats, close their eyes, and rest. The gate agent scanned each ticket with the same cheerful voice, wishing passengers a good flight. When it was finally their turn, Maya smiled politely and walked down the jet bridge. The air inside was cooler than she expected, almost like walking into a room where someone kept the air conditioner running too long. When she entered the airplane cabin, she glanced around, taking in the rows of seats and passengers already getting settled. Her mother's seat was several rows ahead of hers. They hugged briefly before separating. "Call me if you need anything," her mother whispered. "I'll be fine," Maya said. Hoping she sounded confident enough, she walked toward her assigned seat, trying to keep her backpack close so it wouldn't hit anyone. The aisle felt narrow, especially with people already standing to put their bags in the overhead bins. As she reached her spot, she found an older woman already seated in the window seat, smiling kindly at her. "You must be next to me," the woman said. "Yes," Maya replied with a small smile of her own. "Just need to put my bag up." The woman nodded and shifted slightly to give Maya more room. Maya lifted her backpack, but as soon as she tried to push it into the overhead compartment, she realized she wasn't tall enough to get the angle right. She tried again, but the bag slipped down a little. She didn't want to make a scene, so she looked around for help. A flight attendant was standing a few rows ahead, helping another passenger. Maya waited patiently. When the attendant finished, she approached her with a polite, hopeful smile. "Excuse me, Maya," said softly. "Could you please help me lift my bag?" The attendant didn't look at her at first. She was holding a stack of safety cards and seemed to be in a hurry. Finally, she turned with a quick, sharp movement. "What?" the attendant snapped. Maya blinked in surprise. The tone felt harsher than she expected. "I just need help putting this in the overhead bin," Maya said gently. "You need to wait," the attendant said, sounding irritated. "I have other things to do." "Oh. Okay," Maya murmured, stepping back. The older woman in the window seat frowned thoughtfully, giving Maya a sympathetic look. The people in the nearby seats glanced over as well, but they turned away quickly. Pretending not to notice anything, Maya felt her cheeks warm. She didn't want the attention. She just wanted help. A moment later, a man from behind stepped forward. "I can lift it for you," he offered kindly. "Oh, thank you," Maya said. Relieved, he placed the bag into the bin without trouble, and Maya thanked him again before settling into her seat. But the moment left a little knot in her stomach. She didn't understand why the attendant had reacted that way. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe the flight was running late. Maya tried not to think too much about it. She fastened her seatbelt and glanced toward the front where her mother was seated several rows away. She could see just the top of her head. So she knew her mother wouldn't know anything was wrong unless Maya told her later. People were still boarding, and the cabin grew louder as more passengers entered. A baby cried somewhere near the back. A man sneezed loudly. A group of tourists laughed at something on their phone screens. It felt like every usual airplane sound blended into a familiar hum, but the flight attendant's voice didn't blend in. Even from where Maya sat, she could hear the sharp edge in it as the attendant spoke to another passenger. "No, that doesn't go there. I said it goes under the seat, sir." Her tone wasn't angry exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. It held that impatience people usually had when they were overwhelmed, except this was happening before the flight even started. Maya wondered if maybe the attendant was having a bad day. Everyone had bad days, including adults. Still, something about the way she rushed through the aisle made Maya uneasy. A few minutes passed before the plane doors closed. The announcements played. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Everything felt normal enough. Yet something in the atmosphere didn't sit right with Maya. She wasn't sure if it was the earlier moment or just her mind wandering. As the crew prepared for the safety demonstration, the same attendant who snapped at her walked quickly down the aisle, almost bumping into a man's shoulder. He apologized instantly, but she didn't respond. More eyes followed her now. She stopped near Maya's row and spoke to a colleague. The colleague looked confused, whispered something back, and the attendant sighed loudly before walking away again. Maya told herself it wasn't her business. Adults had work stress. Sometimes they rushed. Sometimes they said things harshly without meaning it, but still. She looked at the older woman beside her, wondering if she felt the same. The woman only adjusted her scarf and smiled gently, though Maya noticed she had an uneasy look in her eyes too. When the safety demonstration began, Maya watched carefully, mostly because she always did. But she noticed the crew member performing it pause twice, as if unsure of what came next. She tried to hide it with a smile. But Maya saw her glance nervously toward the aisle. The attendant from before stood near the front, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. She kept sighing under her breath, loud enough for a few nearby passengers to hear. The plane hadn't even left the gate yet, and already it felt tense. When it was time to check seatbelts, the attendant walked row by row, but she wasn't really checking. She barely looked. She rushed past passengers, sometimes skipping entire rows. A man politely tried to ask her a question about his connecting flight, but she held up a hand quickly, not even looking at him. "Not now," she said sharply. Maya watched the man's face fall. He didn't argue. He simply nodded and sank into his seat. Maya felt that same knot tighten in her stomach again. She didn't like seeing people treated that way. She didn't like the feeling of helplessness either. She wanted someone to say something, but she knew most people avoid conflict, especially on planes. When the attendant reached Maya's aisle, she stopped abruptly. "You need your phone off," she said, her voice stern. Maya's heart jumped. She looked down at her hands. "Oh, sorry, I wasn't using it," Maya said. The screen wasn't even on. She had only been holding it. "Put it away," the attendant repeated. Maya did so immediately. Her hands trembling just a little, the attendant moved on without another word. Maya stared at her lap, trying to calm her breathing. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't being rude. But the way the attendant spoke made her feel like she had. She took a deep breath, reminding herself she didn't want trouble. The flight would take off soon, and she would just focus on getting home. But moments later, she heard a soft voice from the seat behind her. "She's really upset today." A woman whispered to her partner. "Yeah," he replied. "Something's definitely off." Maya wasn't the only one noticing then. That made her feel a little less guilty, though not exactly reassured. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her thoughts. She could handle this. It wasn't a big deal. People got stressed. She'd forget it after the flight. But then another moment made her eyes open again. The attendant walked down the aisle again, this time more quickly. She accidentally bumped into a small bag, sticking slightly into the aisle, and turned sharply toward the owner. "You can't have that there," she snapped. The owner, a middle-aged woman, apologized immediately and tucked the bag farther under the seat. The attendant didn't wait or acknowledge her, already walking away. Some passengers looked up, eyebrows raised. Maya shifted uncomfortably. She didn't like tension. It hung in the air now, stretching tighter and tighter. She leaned a little toward the aisle, peeking forward to see if her mother had noticed any of it. She couldn't see her face, but she saw her sitting very still, as if she sensed something too. The older woman beside Maya finally spoke softly. "Don't worry, dear," she said. "Sometimes they're just rushed." Maya nodded, but she knew the woman was only trying to be comforting. She didn't actually believe everything was normal. The pilot's voice came over the speaker. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." Maya's stomach twisted a little. She didn't usually get nervous during takeoff, but this time something felt wrong. It wasn't fear of flying. It was fear of something she couldn't name. She tried focusing on small details, the hum of the engines, the soft beeps from the overhead lights, the rustle of passengers adjusting in their seats, anything to distract herself. But her mind kept circling back to the flight attendant's behavior. It wasn't just impatience. It wasn't just a bad day. It was something deeper, something she couldn't shake. The plane began to push back slowly from the gate. Maya leaned back against her seat, gripping the armrest gently. She closed her eyes again, trying to breathe normally, but one thought kept repeating in her mind. Quiet yet persistent. Something is wrong. Something is really wrong. She didn't know what it meant yet. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. She didn't even know if she had the right to do anything. She was just a teen. Just one passenger among many. But deep inside her, she had a feeling she wouldn't be able to ignore. Not for long. Maya tried to keep her breathing slow as the plane continued moving toward the runway. But the uneasy feeling in her chest only grew stronger. She wasn't usually the kind of person who worried too much. Her mother always said she was calm under pressure, someone who stayed quiet but observant. Yet something about this moment kept tugging at her attention. Refusing to let go, the older woman beside her rested her hands on her lap, staring ahead. She didn't say anything, but her lips were pressed together in a tight line. Even she could feel it, the shift in the atmosphere that didn't match a normal flight. The overhead lights flickered briefly, as they often did, but for some reason the flicker made Maya jump slightly. She glanced around, trying to reassure herself. People were settling into their seats, fastening belts, taking deep breaths. A few passengers yawned loudly. A toddler whined softly, rubbing his eyes. Everything about the passengers themselves felt normal. Everything except the crew. The attendant who had spoken harshly to her earlier was now at the front of the cabin. She stood stiffly beside the intercom, her hands clasped too tightly, her expression tight with something that looked like frustration or worry. Maya couldn't tell which. Every few seconds, she would turn her head sharply toward something only she seemed to notice. Maya knew she shouldn't stare, so she looked down at her hands instead. She rubbed her thumb along the strap of her seatbelt, thinking maybe she was overthinking everything. Maybe the attendant was just upset about something personal. People didn't always hide their feelings well. But then she remembered the moment when the attendant practically barked at her for holding her. Fallen even though she wasn't doing anything wrong, that wasn't normal. Then there was the way she snapped at the man asking for help. The rushed safety check. The strange argument with her colleague. One moment she seemed distracted, and the next she seemed overwhelmed. Maya had never seen a crew member act that way before, and she had flown enough times to know what the usual behavior looked like. The plane slowed slightly as it reached the edge of the runway. The engines hummed louder, filling the cabin with a rising vibration. People braced softly for takeoff, leaning back into their seats. Maya pressed her palms against her thighs, trying to ground herself. Just relax, she told herself. Maybe everything will be fine. But the feeling didn't go away. Instead, it intensified. A low rumble rolled through the cabin as the plane paused before accelerating. Just as Maya swallowed hard, she heard a small gasp from somewhere behind her. It wasn't loud, but enough to catch her attention. She looked over her shoulder. A teenage boy around her age sat with his hands gripping the armrests tightly. He was watching the attendant too. Their eyes met for a moment, and he raised his eyebrows slightly as if silently asking, "Are you seeing this too?" Maya gave the smallest nod. He nodded back. They both looked forward again. The older woman beside Maya leaned slightly closer and whispered, "Not herself today. That one." I hope she's all right. Maya didn't know how to respond. She didn't want to assume anything. She also didn't want to scare the woman or worry her more. So she just whispered, "Yeah." She seemed stressed. Her voice came out softer than she intended. The plane began to move again. A slow roll, then a quicker one. Maya's heart thudded in her chest. But then, the attendant suddenly stepped into the aisle and began walking quickly back toward the middle of the cabin. She walked fast enough that a few passengers startled at the sudden movement. She looked overworked, overwhelmed. Her eyes darted around as if something wasn't right. She wasn't checking anything. She wasn't responding to any passenger. She wasn't even listening to the captain's instructions. Clearly, she looked like she was pacing. That was the moment Maya realized. Something wasn't simply off. It was more serious than she thought earlier. The attendant reached Maya's row, then stopped suddenly when a passenger stood up halfway to adjust the overhead bin. Maybe he forgot to close it earlier. Maybe he didn't hear the announcement. The attendant reacted instantly. "You should not be standing right now," she said sharply. Her voice cracked through the air like something snapping. The man froze, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean sit down," she said louder, her voice trembling slightly. "We're preparing for takeoff. You should know that." Her tone wasn't just strict, it was frantic. The man sat down quickly, apologizing again. A wave of silence washed through the surrounding seats. People exchanged glances. Some forced polite smiles at each other. Others pretended to look at their phones or out the window. Maya felt her heartbeat quicken. She wasn't the only one aware now. The entire cabin could sense something wasn't normal. The attendant stood still for a moment after that outburst. She pressed her fingers against her temples as if trying to steady herself. Then she walked away quickly, disappearing behind the curtain toward the crew station. Maya looked at the older woman beside her. Her expression had changed from calm discomfort to serious worry. "This isn't good," the woman whispered. Maya swallowed hard. "Do you think something's wrong?" "I don't know," the woman murmured. "But she shouldn't be acting like that. Not at this moment. Not during departure." Maya's stomach tightened again. She knew the woman was right. Crew members were trained to handle stress calmly, to keep passengers safe, to show control, even if they felt pressure. But the attendant tonight wasn't calm. She wasn't controlled. She looked like someone fighting something inside her head. Stress, panic, distraction, or something else entirely. A small voice inside Maya said, "Someone needs to do something," but she didn't know who, or what, or even how. She was just a teen sitting in row 19. What could she possibly do? The engines roared a little louder as the plane lined up for takeoff. The cabin vibrated more strongly, and the lights dimmed slightly, as they always did. Maya felt her breathing get shallow. Her thoughts raced. Should she call her mother? Should she press the call button? Should she tell someone, anyone, about her concerns? She wasn't sure if she was overreacting. What if she said something and embarrassed herself? What if she caused trouble for no reason? But then she remembered the safety workshop at school, something she had taken only a few months earlier. It wasn't a big class, just a short training program about recognizing signs of stress in people during emergencies, how to stay calm, and how to alert the right individuals. The instructor had said something she never forgot. If something feels wrong, pay attention. Your instinct is trying to tell you something important. Her instinct was loud now. The plane shook slightly as it turned. People leaned back. The engines grew louder and louder. But then, just seconds before the plane began speeding down the runway, a new voice reached Maya's ears. It wasn't the pilot. It wasn't the crew. It came from behind her. "Miss, excuse me?" The voice belonged to a man a few rows back, speaking softly but firmly. Maya turned her head slightly to listen. Another passenger answered yes. "Did you see the way she was acting?" the man whispered. "Is that normal?" "No," someone else whispered back. "It didn't seem normal at all." Another woman leaned in. "She looks confused or upset. Something's going on." A murmur spread through a small cluster of passengers. Maya wasn't the only one who felt uneasy. People were whispering now, sharing the same worry she had tried to push away. Still, she hesitated. She didn't want to add to the tension, but she felt something building like a rising pressure inside her, urging her to act as she tried to steady her thoughts. She heard the older woman beside her inhale sharply. "Oh dear," the woman whispered. Maya turned quickly. The attendant had returned. She was walking down the aisle again, but this time faster than before. Her hands trembled. Her eyes looked unfocused. She bumped into another passenger's arm and didn't even apologize. She stopped at the front of the aisle, suddenly, and pressed her hand against the wall for support. Closing her eyes briefly, passengers fell silent again. It was clear now, the attendant wasn't well. And whatever was wrong with her was getting worse, not better. Maya felt something inside her shift. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't overreacting. Something truly wasn't right. She thought of her mother again. She thought of the passengers around her. She thought of the crew members' unstable behavior. And then another memory came from that same school workshop. In an emergency, the right information reaching the right person can prevent bigger problems. Her pulse quickened as she considered her options. She couldn't call the captain. She couldn't talk to the other flight attendants. They all looked busy. And she didn't know if they'd take her seriously. Her mother was too far away to communicate with quickly. But there was one person who always listened to her. Her uncle. He worked in airport operations. He knew procedures. He knew aviation rules. He understood how to handle reports. He would know whether this was something serious or not. He would know what to do. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached slowly for her phone, not to use it irresponsibly, but because she felt she needed someone who understood aviation better than she did. She didn't plan to make a scene. She didn't plan to scare anyone. She just needed someone to tell her whether she should be worried, or whether she was misreading everything. She didn't unlock the phone yet. She just held it for a moment, breathing deeply, her heart beating louder than the engines. She waited until the attendant disappeared behind the curtain. Again, then she took a slow breath. Maybe calling her uncle wasn't such a crazy idea. Maybe it was the only thing she could do, or maybe it was the one thing she had to do. Maya held her phone in her hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The plane wasn't speeding down the runway yet, but it was close. The engines were humming louder, like they were ready to launch. If she waited too long, she wouldn't be able to call anyone at all. And once the plane took off, everything would be out of her hands. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she turned the phone so the screen faced downward,
Ice.
trying to hide it from anyone passing by. She didn't want to get scolded again. She didn't want attention. But she also couldn't ignore the feeling twisting inside her. She took one more breath and gently tapped the button to wake the screen, keeping the brightness low. Her heart thumped so loudly she wondered if the older woman beside her could hear it. But the woman didn't look over. She was watching the aisle. It's just like many other passengers were now doing without even realizing. The cabin felt unusually quiet for a plane, preparing for takeoff. It wasn't silent, far from it, but there was a thick, tense hush beneath all the usual noises. The kind of hush people created when they sensed something unusual, but didn't want to be the first to acknowledge it. Maya opened her contacts list, glanced up again to make sure the attendant wasn't returning. The curtain at the front of the cabin remained closed. She tilted her phone slightly and tapped her uncle's name. She didn't plan to make a long call. She didn't even plan to tell him everything right away. She just needed guidance. She needed to know whether she was imagining things or whether she really had a reason to worry. The phone rang once, twice. Her breath caught. By the third ring, she thought he might not answer. But then his voice came through, calm and steady as always. "Hello?" Maya held the phone close to her ear, speaking in a whisper. "Uncle, it's me." "Hey kiddo," he said. "Everything all right? Are you already on the plane?" "Yeah. We're about to take off," she whispered. "But something's wrong." Her uncle's tone shifted instantly. Not panicked, but alert. "What's happening?" Maya swallowed. "One of the attendants. She's acting strange. Not like normal. She snapped at a few people. She's pacing a lot. She looks confused. and she yelled at someone who was just trying to put his bag away. Her uncle was quiet for a moment, listening carefully. Maya could hear some background noise on his end voices, phones ringing, maybe radios. He must have been at work. "Tell me more," he said. "She's not calm," Maya whispered. "She seems stressed. But more than that, she looks nervous, like she's trying to hide something." She rushed through checks. She's not acting like the others." Another pause. "Is she shouting?" her uncle asked. "No," Maya said quickly. "Not shouting. Just speaking harshly. And she looks upset, like she's overwhelmed." "That can happen," he said gently. "Long shifts, delays, personal problems. But tell me this, does she look like she's losing control?" Maya hesitated. I think she might be." Her uncle took a slow breath, thinking. "Listen carefully. You're not in trouble for calling me, okay? You're not breaking any laws. But I need to know something before I do anything. Are the other attendants acting normally?" Maya nodded instinctively, then remembered he couldn't see her. "Yes, they look normal. Just busy." "Okay," he said. "And has the plane started speeding up yet?" "No," Maya whispered. "Not yet. We're still on the taxiway, all right?" His voice lowered, the way it usually did when he was concentrating. "Do not make a scene. Do not draw attention to yourself. Just speak softly and answer me honestly. Do you feel unsafe?" Maya didn't want to sound dramatic. She didn't want to exaggerate. But after everything she saw of the trembling hands, the rushed behavior, the sudden bursts of irritation, she couldn't pretend things were normal. "I don't know if I feel unsafe," she whispered. "But I feel uneasy. And I'm not the only one. People are whispering," her uncle exhaled. "That's enough information. I'm going to contact the airline operations supervisor. They can communicate directly with the pilot. Stay calm. Don't say anything to the crew yourself." Maya nodded, relieved, but also nervous about what would happen next. "Okay, I'll call you right back," he said. "Leave your phone on silent. Don't hold it up. Just keep it hidden, all right?" "Okay, and remember," he added gently, "you're doing the right thing." The call ended. Maya slowly lowered her phone to her lap and slid it under the safety card in the seat pocket, just in case she needed to look at it again quickly. She didn't want anyone to notice. The engines rumbled louder now. The pilot had said nothing unusual. Everyone still assumed takeoff was moments away. But now Maya had done something small, but something meaningful. She didn't know if her uncle could actually stop anything. But at least she wasn't just sitting there feeling helpless. The older woman beside her leaned slightly toward her. "Are you all right, dear?" Maya nodded, keeping her voice steady. "Yeah. Just nervous about takeoff?" The woman gave her a gentle pat on the hand. "You'll be fine. We're all in this together," Maya forced a smile. The woman didn't know she had just made a call. No one knew. And Maya wasn't ready to tell anyone. She stared ahead at the curtain at the front of the cabin. The attendant hadn't come back out yet. Maybe she was speaking with the other crew members. Maybe she was trying to calm herself. Or maybe she was even more overwhelmed back there, a few rows ahead. Maya saw a man lift his hand as if to press the call button, then slowly put it down again. It was clear passengers felt awkward asking for anything right now. Maya wondered what would happen next. She wondered if the pilot would get a message in time. She wondered if she would be singled out or blamed somehow if the crew learned. Someone made a report. She felt her stomach twist again just then. Her phone buzzed, her pulse jumped. She kept her movements small and slipped the phone from the seat pocket quietly. She checked the screen. It was a text from her uncle. "They're contacting the cockpit now. Stay calm, more updates soon." Her breath trembled a little as she read it. He was actually doing something. He took her seriously. She wasn't imagining everything. She put the phone away again. A minute passed. 2 minutes. The engines quieted just slightly, not much, but enough that Maya noticed. The plane slowed its roll. It's not stopping, but not continuing toward the runway either. Then the pilot's voice came over the speakers. His tone was calm. But Maya had flown often enough to hear that something in his voice had changed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been asked to remain in our current position for a few moments. We're expecting further instructions from ground control. Please stay seated with your seatbelts fastened. A ripple went through the cabin. Not fear, just confusion. Some passengers exchanged looks. Others shrugged. A few simply leaned back, tired and impatient. But Maya felt that knot in her stomach loosened just a little. Daughter uncle's message had reached. The plane was no longer heading for takeoff. She let out a slow breath. She hadn't realized she was holding the older woman beside her, nodded softly, as if relieved for a reason she couldn't explain. Sometimes it takes them a while to get their clearance, she said, trying to reassure herself more than anyone else. Maya offered a tiny smile. But then the curtain at the front of the cabin opened again. The same attendant stepped out. Her face was pale now. Her eyes were red, like she had either cried or was holding back tears. She looked as though she hadn't slept in days. Her hands shook slightly as she fixed her uniform collar. Every row she passed grew quieter. She didn't shout. She didn't snap. She didn't speak at all. But she wasn't moving with purpose now. She was moving like someone unsure of their own steps, like someone carrying a heavy weight inside them. She walked down the aisle, pausing occasionally as if she forgot what she was supposed to be doing. A man in her path gently asked, "Excuse me, Mrs., everything all right?" The attendant blinked at him slowly, like she needed a moment just to understand the question. Then she whispered, I'm fine." But it didn't sound convincing. Not to him, not to Maya, not to anyone paying attention. She walked away again, the teenage boy behind. Maya whispered to his friend, "I've never seen a crew member act like that." His friend whispered back, "Something's up. This isn't normal." Maya felt her heart pounding again. But this time she wasn't frozen by fear. She was alert, waiting, hoping her uncle would message again. After another minute, her phone buzzed gently. She checked discreetly. "Plane may return to gate. Stay calm. Don't speak to crew unless necessary." Her breath caught. The plane slowed more. Passengers looked around in confusion as the aircraft made a slow turn, not toward the runway, but away from it. The pilot spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to return to the gate for a brief check before departure. Please remain seated. This won't take long." Now the whispers grew louder. "What check? Why are we going back? Did something happen? Is the plane broken?" But Maya knew the truth, or at least part of it. Something was wrong with the crew, and someone on the ground had been alerted. Maybe someone in operations had told the pilot they needed to verify everything before continuing. She didn't know if they would talk to the attendant. She didn't know if they would replace her. She didn't even know if the rest of the crew understood what was happening. All she knew was that the plane was no longer taking off with someone who was clearly struggling. The older woman beside her whispered, "I wonder what's going on." Maya just said softly, "Maybe something small. I'm sure they'll explain soon." Her voice trembled, but not from fear. From relief. The plane taxied slowly back toward the terminal. The attendant walked down the aisle again, but she no longer looked frustrated or upset. She looked lost. And the moment their eyes met, Maya felt a twist in her chest. Not anger, not fear, but something like sympathy. The attendant wasn't trying to be harsh. She was overwhelmed. Clearly struggling, something inside her had reached a breaking point. As the plane approached the gate, Maya's phone buzzed again. "Good job. You likely prevented a serious issue. Stay seated and calm. More updates soon?" Her chest tightened with a mix of relief and disbelief. She hadn't meant to make a major impact. She hadn't meant to cause a delay. She just followed her instinct. And now the entire plane was returning to the gate because of a quiet call she made in fear and hope. She didn't feel proud. She felt responsible, and she hoped more than anything that whatever happened next would help the attendant, not hurt her, because now Maya understood. Sometimes people didn't act strangely because they were rude. Sometimes they acted strangely because they were struggling silently, and sometimes all it took was one small call to keep everyone safe. when the plane finally began to move away from the gate. Most of the passengers let out a quiet sigh of relief. It had been a tense boarding process, filled with awkward moments and uneasy glances. But everyone hoped things would settle once they were in the air. The cabin lights were still dim, and a soft hum came from the engines as the aircraft slowly rolled forward. The girl sat beside her mother, trying to keep her breathing steady. She had already made the call that her instincts pushed her to make, and now all she could do was wait. She didn't know if anything would come of it. Maybe her uncle would report it. Maybe nothing would happen at all. A part of her hoped she had overreacted, because that would mean everything was safe. But the other part of her, the part that had watched the attendant's behavior closely, kept reminding her of what she had seen. She kept replaying the moments in her head, the shaken hands, the raised voice, the hurried steps back and forth down the aisle. It wasn't anger that scared her the most. It was the confusion. She knew enough to understand that someone responsible for the safety of so many passengers needed to be completely focused, and the attendant clearly wasn't. As the plane continued to taxi, the captain's calm voice came over the speaker. His words were quiet at first, almost routine, like he was about to give the usual pre-departure announcements. But then his tone changed slightly, just enough for attentive passengers to notice. He paused before continuing, and the cabin fell into an alert silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been asked to pause our taxiing," he said. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll have more information shortly." A soft wave of confusion washed through the cabin. People looked around, some lifting their eyebrows, some whispering to each other. The engine slowed down, and the plane came to a gradual stop on the taxiway. This wasn't normal, and everyone sensed it. The girl felt her stomach tighten. Her mother leaned closer. "Do you think something's wrong?" She whispered, "I don't know," the girl answered honestly. She had a guess, but she didn't say it out loud, a few rows ahead. The attendant who had caused all the earlier tension was standing stiffly near the front galley. Her expression flickered between irritation and uncertainty, like she didn't know whether to look busy or wait for instructions. At one point she tried to adjust a compartment door, but her hands trembled again. A fellow crew member stepped closer and whispered something to her, but she shook her head and turned away. Several minutes passed without movement. Passengers shifted in their seats, checking the time, checking their phones in airplane mode, trying to read each other's faces. The quiet was strange, especially on a busy commercial flight, where there was usually always at least some rustling or laughter or conversation. Then the speaker clicked again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been asked to return to the gate," the captain said. "We appreciate your patience. Please remain seated." A restless murmur moved through the cabin like a ripple. Returning to the gate was rarely a small thing. Something had definitely happened. The girl felt her heart thump harder. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "Do you think this is because of what you told your uncle?" her mother asked softly, her voice a mix of worry and surprise. "I'm not sure," the girl said, though inside she felt almost certain. She hadn't expected things to move this quickly. Not at all. The passengers watched as the plane slowly turned around, heading back toward the terminal. The runway lights shimmered outside the windows, casting a faint glow across the cabin. Some people looked annoyed, but many looked uneasy. They had noticed things too, the awkward interactions, the lost look on the attendant's face, the way she had snapped more than once. One man a few rows back whispered to his partner, "I knew something was off." She was dropping things all through boarding. Another woman leaned into her friend and said, "I thought she seemed overwhelmed. I hope she's all right." Their voices were low, but the girl could hear bits and pieces, enough to know she hadn't imagined the whole situation. She wasn't alone in sensing the danger. When the plane finally reached the gate again, a small crew of airport staff approached the aircraft through the windowed jet bridge. People inside craned their necks to see what was going on. The cabin door opened with a soft hiss, and suddenly the mood inside shifted from confused to cautious. A calm-looking supervisor stepped on board first. Behind him was another crew member in a neat uniform, followed by someone from airport security who stood politely near the entrance. They didn't carry any aggressive posture or alarming equipment, just a professional seriousness that told everyone that whatever was happening, it was being handled carefully. The supervisor spoke quietly to the flight attendants at the front. The problematic attendant stiffened slightly when she saw him, as if the reality of being confronted was sinking in. The supervisor asked her something gently, his tone steady, not accusing. She looked down, hesitated, then answered in a shaky voice the passengers couldn't quite hear. He nodded and spoke again, this time even more gently, almost like he was trying to reassure her. The nearby crew members watched with concern rather than frustration, which made the atmosphere slightly softer. Then the supervisor stepped aside and gestured kindly toward the jet bridge. The attendant swallowed, blinked a few times, and finally gave a small, exhausted nod. She walked toward the door, shoulders low, hands clasped in front of her as if trying to hold herself together. She didn't say anything. She didn't look at anyone. She just followed the supervisor out of the plane. Passengers watched quietly, most of them sympathetic rather than judgmental. Even those who had been upset earlier seemed to understand that something deeper had been going on with her. No one clapped or made comments. Instead, the moment passed in a silence filled with mixed emotions: concern, relief, and a bit of sadness. After she left, a replacement attendant who had come with the airport team stepped closer and began speaking with the remaining crew. The captain came out of the cockpit briefly and spoke with the passengers. "Thank you for your patience," he said calmly. "We had a situation that required evaluation before departure. Safety is always our top priority, and we appreciate your understanding." He didn't reveal any personal details, didn't point fingers, and didn't dramatize anything. His professionalism calmed the cabin more than anything else could have. Once he stepped back into the cockpit, the passengers finally began to talk. Openly. "I hope she's okay," one older woman said softly. She looked overwhelmed from the start. A man in a business suit added, "Better. We stop now, then have a problem in the air," someone else murmured. The girl listened quietly, trying to process everything happening around her. She didn't know exactly what her call had triggered behind the scenes, but it was clear it had set off a chain reaction. People had taken it seriously. Decisions had been made quickly. And now, the situation was being handled before the plane even left the ground. Her mother nudged her gently. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "I honestly didn't realize how serious it was until now." The girl nodded slowly. She hadn't acted to get anyone in trouble. She just felt like something wasn't safe. And seeing the careful, respectful way the supervisor had approached the situation made her feel relieved. No one had been harsh. No one had embarrassed the attendant. It had been dealt with in a professional, humane way. The plane remained at the gate a little longer as the new attendant settled in, reviewed safety tasks, and got briefed by the crew. The tension in the air gradually faded, replaced by a kind of collective calm. It felt like everyone on board had silently agreed on one thing: better to wait than to risk anything. Some passengers took this pause as a chance to stretch or adjust their seats. Others leaned back and closed their eyes, glad the situation wasn't chaotic or frightening. A few even smiled reassuringly at the girl and her mother, as if they somehow understood that the pair had played a role in making the flight safer. One woman across the aisle gave the girl a small nod of appreciation. Not overly dramatic. Not intrusive, just a gentle acknowledgement. Like she was saying, "Well done," without using words. The girl felt warmth spread in her chest, though she tried not to show it too much. A few minutes later, the captain made another announcement. "We'll be departing shortly with our updated crew. Thank you again for your cooperation." This time, the murmur across the cabin was calmer and more settled. People buckled in, adjusted their belongings, and prepared for takeoff again. The engines hummed to life, steady and reassuring. The girl looked out the window, watching the lights of the terminal blur slightly as the plane started moving again. It felt different now, safer, steadier, like everyone on board could finally breathe normally again. She didn't feel like a hero. She didn't feel like she had done something dramatic. She had simply trusted her instinct and made a call for help. But as the plane taxied once more toward the runway, She realized something important. Sometimes the right choice doesn't feel heroic. It just feels necessary. And sometimes, doing something small can change everything for a whole plane full of people. When the plane finally lifted off the ground, the girl leaned back into her seat with a long, steady breath. Everything felt different now. The same cabin that had felt tense and uneasy earlier now felt calm, almost peaceful. The passengers who had been whispering anxiously before were now settling into their seats, adjusting blankets, opening books, and putting on headphones. It felt like the entire plane had reset, like the journey had started fresh. A new attendant walked down the aisle, offering a gentle smile to each row. Her steps were steady, her tone warm, and her focus clear. That alone eased the mood of the entire cabin. She checked seatbelts, made sure everyone was comfortable, and even shared a small, friendly comment with a few passengers. Nothing dramatic, nothing over the top, just the kind of professionalism that naturally made people feel safe. The girl watched her mother relax too. She could see her mother's shoulders finally loosen as she rested her head back and closed her eyes. Earlier, her mother had been unsure whether the girl's concern was justified, but now she understood. The entire chain of events, from the raised voice to the call and then the sudden return to the gate, had opened her eyes. The girl gazed out the window. The world below was turning into tiny lights, scattered like stars across the ground. She loved the view from airplanes, how everything looked calm from above. For a moment, she wished life felt that peaceful up close. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Are you feeling okay? Need anything?" It was the new attendant, pausing briefly at their row with a kind smile. "Yes." "Thank you," the girl replied politely. Her mother nodded as well, grateful for the attention. The attendant moved on, gently checking on each passenger. The atmosphere kept softening with every gesture she made. A calm crew member could change the entire energy of a flight, and now everyone could feel the difference. As the plane settled into its cruising altitude, the girl let herself replay everything that had happened. It still didn't feel real. She had been just another passenger, a teenager sitting quietly in her seat. She hadn't planned to notice anything. She hadn't planned to step in. But something about the earlier situation felt too serious to ignore. She had acted almost on instinct. She wondered what would have happened if she had stayed silent. She knew one thing: the flight attendant needed help, and something had pushed her beyond her limit. The girl wasn't angry at her. If anything, she felt sad for her. No one should have to work when they're overwhelmed. No one should be put in a position where they might make mistakes because they weren't ready. Hours passed quietly as the plane continued its journey. Some passengers slept. Some watched movies. Others whispered softly to the people beside them. The girl pulled out a small notebook from her bag and began sketching. Drawing was her way of thinking without feeling overwhelmed. She doodled the outline of the plane, then the clouds, and then, almost without thinking, she drew a pair of hands shaking, just like she remembered the attendants had been. She paused, staring at the drawing. It wasn't perfect, but it captured exactly how she had felt earlier. Her mother glanced at the notebook and gently placed a hand on her arm. "You really did notice things others might have missed," her mother said. "I'm proud of you." The girl smiled softly but didn't say anything. She wasn't used to being praised for something like this. She wasn't even sure it was praiseworthy. She had simply paid attention. That was all. When the plane finally landed at their destination, the passengers began gathering their belongings. The cabin filled with the familiar sounds of seatbelts clicking open and overhead bins being unlatched. People stretched their arms, shook off the stiffness of the long flight, and prepared to step back into the busy world outside. But before anyone stood up completely, the captain made one final announcement. "Thank you for flying with us. We appreciate your cooperation today. Some decisions we made earlier were based on safety measures that help protect everyone on board. Your patience truly made a difference." The girl looked around. Several passengers nodded subtly, understanding the meaning behind his words. No details were sheared on, they didn't need to be. Everyone knew something had been wrong earlier. Everyone was grateful it had been handled. When the plane doors opened, passengers began filing out. A few people offered polite smiles to the crew, including the replacement attendant who was still standing near the entrance. Some passengers gave her a quiet thank you before exiting. She responded to each one with a warm nod as the girl and her mother stepped forward. The attendant looked at them with a thoughtful expression. "Have a safe trip ahead," she said gently. "You too," the girl replied. But just before she stepped out of the plane, she heard a soft whisper behind her. "I'm glad you spoke up." She turned slightly. A man sitting 2 rows back had collected his bag and stood now in the aisle. He didn't say anything more, just gave her a small nod. She nodded back, a bit surprised but thankful. More people seemed to be watching her as she and her mother walked up the jet bridge. There were no big reactions, no applause, no dramatic moments, just quiet acknowledgement from those who understood what had happened. And that was enough. Inside the terminal, her mother finally exhaled deeply. "I didn't say this earlier because everything was happening so fast," her mother said, "but you were brave. Even I didn't want to get involved, but you trusted yourself. You noticed things I didn't. Most adults wouldn't have acted. I just felt something was wrong," the girl said softly. "And you listened to that feeling," her mother replied. As they walked through the terminal, the girl's phone buzzed. It was a message from her uncle. He had finally been able to send her an update. "You did the right thing. The crew member is safe and getting the support she needs. The airline made the right call. Proud of you." The girl stopped walking for a moment as she read it again. The words were simple, but they carried weight. She had hoped the attendant would be okay. Hearing that she was now in the hands of people who could help her made the girl feel lighter, almost like she had let go of something she didn't realize she had been holding on to. Her mother read the message over her shoulder and smiled. "Warmly, that must make you feel better." "It does," the girl admitted. "A lot better." They continued toward the baggage claim area. The airport was busy, full of people rushing in different directions, but she felt strangely calm within all the noise. She didn't feel like a hero or someone who had done something extraordinary. She felt like someone who cared enough to not ignore a problem, someone who believed that even small actions mattered. She thought back to how scared she had felt when she first made the call. Her hands had been shaking. Her voice had been quiet. She didn't feel brave then. She felt uncertain. But courage wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a trembling voice, doing something simply because it seemed right. When they reached the luggage belt, her mother stepped aside for a moment to grab a cart. As the girl waited alone, an older woman from the plane approached her. She was the same passenger who had nodded to her earlier during the delay. "You knew something was wrong, didn't you?" the woman said softly. The girl paused, unsure what to say. "I just felt worried," she replied honestly. "Well," the woman said kindly, "sometimes that's all it takes to keep people safe. I'm glad you trusted your instincts." The older woman gave her a gentle smile before walking away. The girl watched her go, feeling something warm settle in her chest again. She didn't need big praise. These simple, sincere moments were more meaningful than anything else. Her mother returned with the cart, and together they collected their bags. As they walked toward the exit, the girl thought about the attendant again. She wondered how she felt now. She hoped the supervisors had spoken to her gently, the same way they had on the plane. She hoped she received understanding rather than blame. The girl believed that mistakes and struggles didn't define someone. What mattered was helping people when they needed it most. Outside the airport, the evening air felt cool against her skin. Cars moved in long lines, families reunited, travelers rushed for taxis, and the lights of the city shimmered in the distance. The girl took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh air. Her mother placed an arm around her shoulders as they walked toward the pickup area. "You know," her mother said softly, "you might not realize it now, but what you did today made a difference for everyone on that plane." The girl looked down for a moment, then up at the night sky. "I didn't want anything bad to happen," she said. "I just wanted everyone to be safe." "Because of you," her mother replied. They were. They stood together as cars passed by, waiting for their ride. The girl felt something she hadn't felt earlier, a sense of quiet pride. Not the kind that made her feel bigger or more important, but the kind that came from knowing she had listened to her conscience when it mattered. Their ride pulled up, and they placed their bags inside. As they drove away from the airport, the girl looked back one last time at the terminal glowing in the night. It was strange to think that such a simple decision, one phone call, could change the direction of an entire flight. But sometimes, life worked that way. Small moments carried big meaning. She turned forward again, settling into her seat. Tomorrow, most people from that flight would go on with their lives. They would forget the delay. They might forget the tension. They might even forget the face of the attendant who had been replaced. But maybe, somewhere deep in their memory, they would remember that someone had cared enough to say something, and the girl would. Remember to not because she wanted credit, but because the experience taught her something she would carry forever. Sometimes paying attention saves people. Sometimes courage is quiet. And sometimes even one small voice can steady a whole plane full of hearts.